Chapter 1. Whispers in the Fog. The morning mist had not yet lifted from the hedgerows when the village of Rosehill stirred to life. It was the sort of fog that curled around fences like old secrets and made even familiar cottages seem uncertain and shy. Sparrows flitted unseen through the haze, and the old church bell gave a single, reluctant chime, not a call to prayer, but a sleepy yawn. It was, to all appearances, a normal Tuesday in this quiet corner of the world, except that nothing would be normal again, not after what happened at Sycamore Lodge. The lodge had always held a certain fascination for Rosehill's residents. Perched on the edge of Dobbin's Wood, just a mile from the village green, it was a Victorian house with sharp gables, a sunless conservatory, and ivy climbing its crumbling stone like greedy fingers. Children dared each other to creep past its iron gates. Gardeners swore the trees near it never quite blossomed. And after dusk, more than one passer-by had reported flickering lights in its long-abandoned upper rooms. Miss Jane Marple, now nearing her 87th year, had always thought it rather unfair to call the place haunted. After all, many large, lonely houses gave off that impression if left too long in silence. But even she admitted that something about Sycamore Lodge had grown uneasy in recent weeks. It began with the return of Arabella Fife. Arabella, widow of the late Colonel Fife, a man more remembered for his shouting than his service, had spent 2 decades abroad in a curious drift of seaside hotels, watercolor clubs, and gentlemen companions whose names changed with the season. Then, quite without fanfare, she reappeared in Rosehill. She arrived in a pale blue Daimler with a silent chauffeur and 2 ancient Labradors. By week's end, she had moved into the very house she once swore she'd never step foot in again. "I always said she'd come back to bury something," said Mrs. Merton, the vicar's wife, as she handed Miss Marple a slice of seed cake that very afternoon. "Or dig something up," replied Miss Marple mildly. Watching the steam curl from her teacup. In the days that followed, the village watched from a polite distance. Arabella rarely ventured out, and when she did, she wore a veil. Not a fashionable one either, a thick black thing with a stiff hem and small moth holes at the edges. Her voice, once infamous for commanding dinner parties, was softer now. And yet, those who met her eyes said there was something sharp there, like frost in the middle of a mirror. Then came the screaming. It was just past 2 in the morning when old Mr. Jenkins, the postmaster, reported hearing a woman cry out. His cottage overlooked the far lane, and he'd been half asleep with a chest complaint. The scream, he swore later, had not been one of pain. It was terror. "The kind that rips out of you," he told the constable, "when you see something you weren't meant to." The next morning, Constable Bowden was dispatched to the lodge. He returned pale and tight-lipped. Officially, nothing was found. Unofficially, the constable was seen in the public house that night, refusing his usual bidder and muttering about walls that echo back at you. Miss Marple, of course, noticed it all, the shuttered faces, the quiet glances. She also noted that the church bulletin that week had a mistake. Sycamore Lodge was listed among the parish homes requesting flowers for Sunday's altar. A small detail, but telling, for the lodge had never once asked for roses before. Then, on the 4th morning, the body was found. It was Arabella Fife, dead in the drawing-room, seated stiffly in an armchair, as if still waiting for tea. Her hands folded in her lap, her face perfectly calm. Only the faint bruising at her temple and the cracked crystal decanter on the floor hinted at violence. "She looked like she'd seen a ghost," murmured the maid, who found her. Only it weren't no ghost that hit her. As news spread, the village erupted. Rosehill, so small and proper, rippled with fear. Doors were bolted. The Women's League postponed their midsummer picnic. And down in the market, 2 butchers nearly came to blows over whether it had been burglars or revenge. Through it all, Miss Marple sat quietly by her window, knitting a particularly complex lace pattern and watching the world like a cat at the hearth. She had known Arabella Fife. Not well, not intimately, but well enough to remember a sly smile during a church raffle years ago, and a peculiar conversation about inheritance law beside a hedge maze in Devon. There were people, Miss Marple had long observed, who wore elegance like armor. Arabella had been one of them. Now, she was dead, and somewhere in Rosehill, someone was pretending to mourn. Chapter 2. The Talk in the Tea Room. By mid-morning, the only thing heavier than the sky over Rosehill was the silence that followed Arabella Fife's death. Not the silence of grief, not quite. Rosehill was not a village that gave itself to overt mourning. Rather, it was the silence of calculation, of sideways glances, of people quietly assessing how closely their names might come up in conversation now that there had been, unmistakably, a murder. The Rosehill tea room, quaintly wedged between the greengrocer's and a hat shop that hadn't sold a hat in 12 years, was unusually full for a Wednesday. The scent of scones and gossip filled the air. Mabel Harkness, the proprietress, had taken to wiping down the same counter 3 times in the same spot, just to eavesdrop better. And they say she was holding a letter, whispered Nora Finch. A wiry woman with a voice like crushed tinfoil. Whose letter? Asked Mrs. Blake, lowering her teacup, but not her voice. Well, that's just it, isn't it? Nora leaned forward conspiratorially. The letter had no name, just ... initials. Oh, I do love initials, sighed Mrs. Bickley from the corner. They always mean secrets. Miss Marple entered just then, the small brass bell above the door giving a polite ring. The room fell into an awkward hush, as though they'd all been caught doing something terribly improper, which, of course, they had. Jane, called Mabel, brightening. Your usual table's just been cleared. I've saved the Darjeeling. For you. Thank you, Mabel. You're a dear, Miss Marple said warmly, removing her gloves 1 finger at a time. She moved slowly, as she always did, but with a quiet steadiness that seemed to calm the air around her as she settled into her corner chair. The room resumed its quiet murmur. No one ever excluded Miss Marple from their conversations, but when she was near, they were certainly more careful. Careful, however, did not mean subtle. She was pale when she came back to Rosehill, Nora continued, lowering her voice only slightly. Some said she hadn't been well. Others, well, you know what they say about women who travel alone. They come back with stories they daren't repeat, said Mrs. Blake. Primly. Miss Marple stirred her tea, her expression unreadable. What she was thinking, no one could tell. But she was, as always, listening. At the far end of the tea room. The postman, Mr. Jenkins, was hunched over a scalding cup and rehashing his tale for the 4th time. It weren't just a scream, he insisted. It were a piercing thing. Like someone saw something unnatural, like a spirit, suggested young Kitty Hargrove, eyes wide. I'm not saying that, Jenkins said carefully. I'm just saying, well, it didn't sound like anything living ought to make. The tea room was still. I think it's ghastly, said Mabel. Suddenly, Arabella may have been ... frosty, but she was one of us. Was she? Someone muttered behind a napkin. Miss Marple sipped her tea. Arabella had been one of them once. But people change when they leave. And perhaps more importantly, villages change when people return. Especially when they return with secrets. She looked up as the door opened again, and in stepped Inspector Richard Medford, young, not quite 40, with sandy hair and a trimmed mustache that was too tidy to be fashionable. Inspector Medford was still considered an outsider, despite living in Rosehill for nearly 6 years. The villagers respected him, but never quite trusted him. He was polite, competent, and in their view, dangerously modern. He paused, noting the stillness. "Ladies?" he said with a nod. "Inspector," several voices replied. "Just a fraction too brightly." "Miss Marple," he said, turning to her. "May I join you?" "Of course, Inspector," she said, gesturing gently to the seat opposite. "Though I suspect you'll find more useful information from the table near the jam tarts. That's where the most extravagant theories are being served." A small smile touched his lips. "And yet I always find your table the most enlightening." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, until he said, in a lower voice, "You heard, I assume?" "I've heard more than I was told," she said mildly. "But yes." Medford glanced about. "There are difficulties." The scene was odd, almost staged. Yet there was no sign of forced entry, no sign of theft. The only thing missing was, well, we're not even sure it was missing. Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, silently encouraging him. There was, apparently, a journal Arabella kept. According to her maid, she wrote in it daily, every night before bed. Pages and pages. It's not there now. "That's interesting," said Miss Marple, setting down her teacup. "Not what's in the journal, but the idea that someone wanted it gone." He nodded. "Precisely. And yet no fingerprints, no broken lock. Just Arabella, struck once cleanly. Dead before she could cry out." "She did cry out," Miss Marple said softly. "But not with her voice." Medford blinked. "Pardon?" "She sent word another way," Miss Marple said, as if to herself. "Something felt wrong the moment she returned. And now she's dead. This isn't a crime of passion. It's a crime of planning." "Do you think it's someone local?" he asked quietly. Miss Marple turned toward the windows, where the fog was thinning now, revealing the sharp outline of the trees near Dobbin's Wood. "In villages," she said gently, "everything is local, even ghosts." Chapter 3. Footsteps on the landing. The front door of Sycamore Lodge creaked on its hinges as Inspector Medford stepped inside, notebook tucked under one arm, boots clean but already squeaking against the waxy tiled floor. The air inside was cold, not from open windows, but from something deeper, embedded in the walls themselves. Sycamore Lodge, even in daylight, did not feel like a place meant for the living. The drawing room still bore the remnants of the scene. Arabella Fife's body had been removed hours ago, but the room was untouched otherwise. A faint indentation in the armchair remained where she had sat, frozen in death. The broken decanter was still on the rug, its remaining contents soaked into the Persian weave, staining it like a shadow. Standing nearby was Clara Moffat, Arabella's housemaid, and by all accounts, the only other person in the lodge. The night Arabella died. "She was quiet all evening," Clara murmured, twisting a damp handkerchief. "Didn't ask for supper. Just sat there in the drawing room with her journal, same as always. When I brought up her tea tray, she didn't say a word. Just waved me off." "What time was that?" asked Medford. "Just after 9. "And when did you find her?" "Next morning. 7:30. She always rang for tea by 7, so when she didn't, I came down to check. Found her like that." Her eyes flicked toward the chair, though she could not bear to look directly. "She was already cold. Did she seem afraid recently?" he asked. "Unwell? Nervous? She was always." "Sharp," Clara said hesitantly. "But something changed these last few days. Kept asking if I'd heard noises at night. Kept checking the back stairs. She even locked her bedroom door, which she never used to do. Told me not to touch her papers. Said there were things she needed to put right." Medford wrote this down carefully. "Did she say what she meant?" "No, but she asked for a lawyer. Said she needed to change her will. Mr. Pym from Market Grendon. I rang twice, but he was away. She said she couldn't wait." "Wait for what?" Clara paused. "She didn't say." Back in the village, Miss Marple was taking her afternoon walk. She never hurried. That was the key, really. People assumed that because she walked slowly, she saw little, but the truth was quite the opposite. She noticed everything. A curtain twitched where it shouldn't. A boot print in fresh soil. A sudden change in a shopkeeper's mood. These were the marks of guilt, of fear, of stories kept too long behind the teeth. She paused at the greengrocer's, bought a small punnet of blackberries, and struck up a conversation with young George Sims, the delivery boy who cycled the back roads with crates strapped to his handlebars. Awful business. What happened? He said, already glancing around. To be sure no one else was listening. I saw something, you know. Oh? Said Miss Marple gently. Night before she died. I was coming down the south lane, shortcut past the lodge. Moon was up. Saw someone standing at her side gate. Did you recognize them? He hesitated. Not really, just a shape. Man, I think, tall, wearing a hat. Didn't see his face, but he went in. I didn't hear the gate close. And you didn't mention this to the police? Didn't seem my place. Could have been staff. Of course, said Miss Marple, with a small, approving nod. And thank you, George. Sometimes the smallest detail is what lets the light in. She left him standing there, blinking. That evening, in her cozy sitting room filled with ticking clocks and fading rose wallpaper, Miss Marple laid out a small card table and began assembling a puzzle. Not a metaphorical one, a real cardboard. Jigsaw. But she always said the mind works best with a simple task to anchor it. Sycamore Lodge was a place full of locked rooms and darker corners. But it was not haunted. At least, not in the supernatural sense. No, what haunted it was memory and guilt. Arabella had returned not to hide, but to settle something. Something she feared would not stay buried. Miss Marple paused and picked. Up the corner piece of sky. So far, they had a missing journal, a changed will, a visitor in the night, a scream, and a woman who knew something terrible, and perhaps too late, tried to undo it. Outside, the wind had picked up. And upstairs, in a house that had been silent for years, footsteps had been heard on the landing, but Clara had been alone, hadn't she? Chapter 4. The Lawyer Who Came Too Late. Mr. Edwin Pym arrived in Rosehill on Thursday morning, wrapped in tweed and in patience. He was not a man one would call likable, but he was respected, a solicitor of the old school, precise and humorless. With a pocket watch, he consulted more than most men did their wives. His office in Market Grendon bore the scent of mildew and ink, and he had handled the estates and secrets of several notable families with an admirable lack of curiosity. Now, he stood in the entryway of Sycamore Lodge, tapping his umbrella and muttering. I told her I'd be gone 3 days, he said stiffly. Vienna, my niece's wedding, but she was quite insistent. Left a message with my secretary, said she had to change her will immediately, insisted on urgency. And now, of course. He gestured vaguely toward the drawing-room. Inspector Medford, standing near the hearth, nodded. Do you know what she intended to change? She didn't say, Mr. Pym replied, which is unlike her. Arabella was always sharp as a tack, and twice as pointed. She didn't deal in vagueness. If she was rattled enough to call without details, then something had shaken her. Could it be she feared someone might challenge the current will? Mr. Pym sniffed. Unlikely. The present will, drawn up 7 years ago, leaves the lodge and all assets to a Miss Honor Fife. Yes, daughter of Arabella's late brother. They've had no contact in years, but the inheritance was clear. Arabella said it was a clean solution, no entanglements. No drama. Medford raised an eyebrow. And yet she changed her mind, apparently. Miss Marple, who had been sitting quietly near the doorway, with Inspector Medford's full consent, by now, he had learned the value of her presence, tilted her head. Forgive me, Mr. Pym, she said gently. But was Miss Fife ever in financial trouble? The solicitor gave a tight smile. Isn't everyone these days? But deeply so? Miss Marple persisted. The sort of trouble one might wish to escape, or hide. Mr. Pym frowned. I wouldn't know, but Miss Marple thought he did know. He simply didn't wish to say. That, too, was part of the old-school solicitor's charm. Silence where others might speculate. When Mr. Pym left, he passed Clara, the housemaid, in the hall, and gave her a nod, so faint it could have been mistaken for a tick. Clara, meanwhile, was trembling. I've cleaned up the tray, she said to Inspector Medford, but I found something odd behind the cabinet. They followed her into the drawing-room. Clara knelt and reached behind a narrow sideboard near the fireplace. With effort, she withdrew a small velvet pouch, dark green, tied tightly with a black ribbon. It was dusty. Hidden for some time. Inside was a bundle of yellowed letters, tied with twine. The ink on the outermost one had bled with age, but the initials at the top were still visible. R. F. Medford carefully untied the bundle and unfolded the top letter. His eyes widened. These aren't Arabella's. Miss Marple took a single step forward, quietly alert. May I? He handed her the page. She read silently. The writing was elegant, but urgent. A confession of affection and something more. It spoke of a night long ago, of betrayal, of a promise broken, of something buried beneath the orchard at the edge of the property. A grave, not of a thing, of a man. I still see him when I close my eyes. Miss Marple read aloud, voice low, the way he looked in the moonlight, slumped beside the wheelbarrow. I know we were wrong, but you said we had no choice. She looked up. These aren't love letters. They're a confession. Later that afternoon, the gossip in the village had gone from idle curiosity to near hysteria. The news, as it always did, had leaked. There were letters. There had been another body. Rumors of a buried man, a secret lover, a family curse. No one agreed on the details, but everyone agreed on one thing. Arabella Fife had died with blood on her hands. At the vicarage, Reverend Plumstead, a nervous man with a fondness for Latin and lemon drops, attempted to calm his congregation. Let us not give in to speculation, he said. Let us pray for the dead and for the living. Miss Marple, seated quietly in the back pew, folded her gloved hands and said nothing. She had begun to piece it together. A woman returns home with a burden. She fears something from the past will resurface. She contacts a lawyer, begins writing. Again. Then, before she can act, she is killed, and someone takes her journal. The journal that likely held everything. Miss Marple did not believe in ghosts, but she did believe in guilt. And she had known people, seemingly ordinary, decent people, driven to strange acts when old sins came clawing back. She would need to speak with honor. Fife. The niece. The heir. The girl who hadn't spoken to Arabella in years, and yet stood to inherit everything. Chapter 5. The niece in the photograph, Honor Fife, arrived in Rosehill 2 days after the murder, wearing a storm gray coat in grief that didn't quite fit. She was tall, unusually so, with a swan-like neck and the kind of pale, sculpted features that the villagers found unnerving. Her eyes were a sharp blue, her hair a shade darker than her late aunt's, and her voice clipped as if every sentence had been drafted before it was spoken. She did not cry. I've been on a lecture tour in Barcelona, she told Inspector Medford, her suitcase still in the hall at Sycamore Lodge. They didn't tell me until after the conference. I came as soon as I could. The lodge felt no warmer for her presence. She walked through the house without a hint of nostalgia. Her gloved fingers trailed the banister. She glanced at the fireplace where her aunt had died, paused briefly, and then said, I'll need a full inventory of the estate. Has the will been read? Not yet, said Medford. There may have been an attempt to change it before your aunt's death. Honor stiffened. Change it how? We're not sure. A solicitor was contacted, but arrived too late. And what does that mean for me? Miss Marple, standing silently in the foyer with her handbag folded neatly in front of her, stepped forward with quiet politeness. It means, Miss Fife, that you remain the beneficiary of the current will, unless the journal your aunt was writing in reveals other intentions. Honor turned to her, her face unreadable. And you are? Jane Marple, she said simply. An old acquaintance of your aunt's, and someone who dislikes seeing untidy endings. Miss Marple has been assisting me, Medford added quickly. She has a talent for human patterns. Honor's eyes flicked back to the older woman. Patterns can be deceiving, Miss Marple smiled gently. Only if you arrange them incorrectly. Later that afternoon, in the village shop, Miss Marple stood, flipping through a forgotten stack of birthday cards, while the villagers whispered behind the biscuit tins. She looks nothing like Arabella, Mrs. Wilkes muttered. Cold as February, said Nora Finch. Not even a black ribbon. She looked like she was attending a board meeting. She was always a peculiar child, said Mrs. Bickley. Remember? Lived here for a while after her father died. Only smiled once, and that was when she saw a crow eat a frog. That's nonsense, sniffed Mabel Harkness. She was just shy. But shy didn't explain the tone in Honor Fife's voice, or the way she'd stared at the broken decanter without blinking, or how, when shown her aunt's letters, she had asked, "Is this legally relevant?" instead of "What do they say?" That evening, Miss Marple sat before her fireplace, turning pages in an old village scrapbook. She found what she was looking for in the Yasudo, July 1939 section. A photo from the village fete. There, on the sun-bleached page, stood Arabella Fife as a young woman, smiling beneath a striped parasol. Beside her stood a man in uniform, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cleft chin and a dazzling grin. The caption beneath read, Arabella and R.F. Rosehill Fete, just before deployment. R.F. The initials from the letters. Miss Marple stared at the face. Robert Farnham. A local. Handsome. Well-liked. Went off to war, and according to village memory, never returned. Shot down over the channel, someone had once said. Terrible business. But Miss Marple had always found it strange that no official telegram had ever been received. No funeral, no plaque, no proof. And now the letters claimed he never left Rosehill at all. She closed the scrapbook slowly. If Robert Farnham had died at Sycamore Lodge and been buried there, in secret, then Arabella's death wasn't the beginning of a mystery. It was the end of one. Or so someone had hoped. That night, Miss Marple couldn't sleep. Rain tapped at her windows like fingers trying to get in. Somewhere outside, a fox barked, sharp, sudden. And in the shadows of her mind, a theory began to take shape. It involved two women, one who had been young and reckless once, and another who had grown up under the weight of that recklessness. One had buried a secret. The other had come back to dig it up, or inherit it. Miss Marple rose and crossed to her desk. She wrote a single name on a piece of paper. Then, below it, she wrote 3 more. And beneath those, a single question. Who knew about the orchard? Chapter 6. Beneath the orchard trees, the orchard behind Sycamore Lodge had once been lovely. Apple and plum trees stood in neat rows, their roots tracing old paths beneath the soil. But over the years, the branches had grown wild, the fruit less sweet, and the grass long and uncut. Since Colonel Fife's passing, no gardener had lasted more than a few months. Some said Arabella refused to let them near the far end of the orchard. Others said the ground there was poor, bad for planting. Miss Marple did not believe in bad soil. Only buried history. It was mid-morning when she arrived at the lodge gate, a folded shawl over her shoulders and a calm purpose in her step. She had telephoned Inspector Medford that morning with a curious request. Would you be so good as to bring someone from the council with ground-penetrating equipment? Oh, I do know it sounds theatrical, but I think we'll find something under the orchard, something long forgotten or deliberately hidden. And to his credit, Medford, who was learning never to doubt Miss Marple's instincts, agreed that by the time she arrived, a single policeman was parked near the back hedge. A young constable stood with a local surveyor from Market Grendon, who was adjusting a portable scanner on wheels. Miss Marple, said Medford, meeting her at the gate. Are we truly looking for a body? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Oh no, dear. I believe we're looking for a grave. It didn't take long. The orchard's grass was wet and cool beneath their feet. Several trees at the far end leaned slightly eastward, as if shying away from what lay beneath. The constable marked an area where the scanner had chirped twice, in quick succession. It was rectangular, human-size. The inspector signaled. Within minutes, a pair of officers with shovels began to dig. Miss Marple stood with her hands clasped gently at her waist, watching each layer of earth peel back like the pages of an old diary. Then the sound changed, the hollow thunk of metal. Against wood. They had found it, a crude wooden box, unmarked, rotted around the edges. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were bones. Not ancient, not fresh. Male. Inspector Medford exhaled. It's him, Robert Farnham. Miss Marple didn't speak for a moment. She looked up at the trees overhead, branches swaying gently. Orchard always leaned toward the house, she murmured. But she leaned away from the guilt, until it killed her. The village was in uproar by that evening. The news traveled faster than logic. Some said it had been a love triangle gone wrong. Others swore Robert had been a spy. One theory involved a duel, another witchcraft, and someone even suggested that Arabella had buried multiple men, a theory based on absolutely nothing but the speed with which her rosebushes once grew. But only a few people heard the quiet knock at Miss Marple's door that night. On her fife. She stood in the doorway like a statue chiseled from rain. She was pale, but not shaken. Her voice was clear. I suppose you think I killed her, she said. Miss Marple tilted her head. Should I? Honor stepped inside without being asked, rain dripping from her sleeves. She sat on the edge of Miss Marple's rose-print sofa like a guest on trial. I hated her, she said bluntly. She sent me away when I was 15. Told me I was tainted by my mother. I never understood what she meant, only that she resented me. And yet you came back. I came back to see what she was hiding. I wanted to know why she cut me off, why she hoarded that house like a dragon over treasure. I never expected this. Miss Marple watched her carefully. You never visited again? No, just letters. She never replied. And yet she left everything to you. Maybe she felt guilty. Or maybe, Miss Marple said softly, you are the only person who still scared her. Honor looked up sharply. I didn't kill her. Miss Marple nodded. No, but you know who did. The room fell silent. The fire crackled. Then, quietly, Honor said, Clara, the maid. I think she knew everything. I think my aunt told her, or perhaps she already knew. They'd been in that house alone for years. You don't live that close to someone and not sense something is wrong. Go on, Miss Marple urged. The night before Arabella died, I spoke to Clara. I called the house. She didn't say much, but she sounded frightened, not of Arabella, for her. Back at Sycamore Lodge, Clara Moffat stood at the drawing room window. She hadn't spoken to anyone since the body was uncovered. The orchard was now cordoned off, a single light flickering beneath the trees like a lantern guarding the dead. She had tried to keep it hidden, had tried to protect her mistress's shame and her own, but it had all come out. Robert Farnham's name, the letters, the bone-thin truth. Clara had been in love with him too. Arabella had made a choice all those years ago. And then she'd made Clara an accomplice. Now, Arabella was gone, and the past had risen from the soil. Chapter 7. The woman who stayed too long, Clara Moffat, had never meant to stay at Sycamore Lodge. She had come as a housemaid at 20, barely. Out of school, grateful for the stability and the 2 polished brass bells that called her to duty. Arabella Fife had been younger then, proud, witty, terrifying. There were guests every weekend. Decanters sparkled. Laughter rang through the halls like wind chimes in a storm. It felt to Clara like living inside a theater. But theaters close. The guests stopped coming. Colonel Fife died of something the doctors never named, and Arabella closed the front parlor like sealing off a memory. Slowly, the house went quiet. One maid left, then another. Clara stayed. Not out of duty, but something else. Something murkier. Something she never spoke of. And now, with Arabella dead and the orchard unburied, Clara stood at the edge of a decision she had been avoiding for 25 years. Inspector Medford returned. To the lodge just after 7, rain still on his collar. Clara let him in without a word. Her eyes were dry, but dark-rimmed from lack of sleep. "I suppose you'll want to speak with me properly," she said. He nodded. "We've confirmed the remains. Robert Farnham. I knew it would be." "You?" "Told us your relationship with Arabella was purely professional." Clara looked down at her hands. "That was a lie. Why?" She gave a sad smile. "Because the truth would have made it worse." She led him to the old morning room. Unused now, covered in dust. It faced the orchard. The rain had stopped, but the ground was dark and heavy, like breath held too long. She loved him, Clara said. Arabella. Robert, too, I suppose. But she was older, wealthier. He was a gardener's son. It wasn't meant to last. And yet it did? Clara shook her head. Not exactly. He asked her to leave with him. To start over. She refused. Said it was beneath her. What happened? Clara closed her eyes. He came that night to say goodbye. I heard them shouting. Then silence. When I reached the back hallway, he was already gone. Gone? Dead. At the base of the stairs, I don't know if he fell or if she pushed him. Inspector Medford sat very still. She said it was an accident, Clara continued. Begged me to help her. She said no one would believe her. Not the villagers, not the police. There had been rumors. People would think it was murder. So we buried him, just the 2 of us, under the orchard before sunrise. You kept that secret for 25 years. I thought I had to. For her, for myself. Her voice wavered, but it never went away. He haunted this house, Inspector. Not with footsteps or cold spots, but with silence. The kind that grows under floorboards. And now? Clara looked out toward the orchard. Now he's been found. And she's dead. And I'm the only one left who knows the truth. Medford's pen paused. Did you kill her, Clara? A pause. No, she whispered. But I think I helped. That same night, Miss Marple sat in her sitting room, piecing together a tapestry of memory and motive. It wasn't Clara who had struck the blow. Of that, she was certain. Clara had been weighed down by loyalty to Arabella, to shame. She was a ghost of the past, not a killer of the present. The real question was, who knew? About Robert before the body was found? Who had something to lose if Arabella told the truth? The answer was becoming clearer now. It was never about the inheritance. Not really. It was about what Arabella might have revealed, and to whom someone had learned the truth, someone younger, smarter, unburdened by old loyalty, someone who had always wondered why she had been banished, and why her aunt had sent for a solicitor so suddenly. Miss Marple took out a sheet of writing paper and began to draft a letter. Dear Miss Fife, I would very much like to speak with you again. There's something you said, or rather, didn't say, that has been troubling me. Chapter 8. A proper English tea on her Fife arrived precisely at 4:00 single quotes clock. Miss Marple, ever traditional, had already set the tea things, a pot of Earl Grey, lemon slices, shortbread biscuits, and a plate of sliced seed cake. A small parlor was warm with quiet light, and though the fire was low, the air between the two women felt heavy with something far less comfortable. Honor sat without invitation, not rudely, but as though she had long since stopped waiting for permission. You said you had a question, she said, removing her gloves one finger at a time. Miss Marple nodded, pouring the tea. Several, actually, but only one I believe you'll answer honestly. Honor raised an eyebrow. Try me. Miss Marple's tone was mild. Why did you come back to Sycamore Lodge before Arabella's death? There was a small silence. I told you, Honor said carefully. I came when I was informed she died. Indeed. And yet George Sims, a boy with no reason to lie, saw a woman matching your height and coat slip through the side gate the night before the body was discovered. Honor's teacup remained steady in her hand. George Sims sees things he doesn't understand. And your voice, Miss Marple continued, on the phone. It wasn't the first time you rang the house that week, was it? Honor said nothing. Miss Marple leaned in slightly. Arabella asked for her solicitor after you spoke, not before. And she seemed, by all accounts, deeply agitated afterward. Finally, Honor set down her cup. I asked her who my father was. She said flatly. Miss Marple tilted her head. She always told me he was some traveling Frenchman. A fiction. I knew it wasn't true. She never answered properly. But that week, she hesitated. I could hear it. There was something she'd kept from me. I came to demand the truth. And did you get it? She told me Robert Farnham was my father. The room went still. She said he'd wanted to marry her. Honor went on. But something happened. A fight. An accident. She said he fell, and that no one ever knew. Except Clara. I think she wanted to confess. Perhaps to clear her conscience. Or perhaps to stop being afraid of me. Miss Marple studied her. And how did you feel? Honor looked away, jaw set. Like someone had rearranged my entire life without asking. Did you strike her? No. Miss Marple was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, what about the journal? Honor hesitated. I took it. Ah, Miss Marple murmured. And destroyed it? No, I still have it. She opened her handbag and produced a small leather-bound book, its edges smudged with wear. I wanted to know if she'd lied to me, or worse, I read it, every page, and she didn't lie. Miss Marple took the journal gently and placed it on the tea tray, untouched. May I ask why you're giving it to me now? Honor's voice dropped. Because there's something in it you'll understand better than I do. A name, a final entry. Something I can't make sense of. Later that evening, alone with the journal, Miss Marple read slowly, her finger tracing the careful script. Most of it confirmed what Clara had said. Robert's death, the panic, the burial. But toward the final page, Arabella's tone shifted, as if she sensed time running out. If Honor ever finds this, she must know. I never meant to lie. I did what I thought was safest for her. But I also know there's still someone watching. Someone who knows more than Clara does. I saw the curtain move. The same curtain that moved the night Robert died. The same room. The same face. Miss Marple closed the book. The murder had not been committed to protect Honor. It had been committed to silence. Arabella, before she told Honor what else she had seen, another witness. One who had remained silent all these years, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. At that moment, across the village, Clara Moffat was climbing the stairs of Sycamore Lodge with a candle in her hand. She moved slowly, deliberately, toward the guest bedroom Arabella had long since sealed off, the one that faced the orchard and whose window Arabella claimed never stayed shut. Inside, the air was stale. Clara approached the wardrobe, reached behind it, and withdrew a single object wrapped in oilcloth, a photograph of Arabella, Robert Farnham, and a third person standing in the background, nearly obscured by shadow. A face Clara had never forgotten. And now she knew she couldn't keep silent much longer. Someone else had been there the night Robert died, and Clara finally knew who it was. Chapter 9. The face behind the curtainette was just after 8 the next morning when Miss Marple arrived at the police station with Arabella Fyfe's journal in hand. Inspector Medford, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes, waved her into his office. "Another revelation, Miss Marple?" "Of a sort," she said, settling into the armchair across from his desk. "There is a face we have overlooked. One that was present both at the time of Robert Farnham's death and, I believe, at the time of Arabella's." Medford blinked. "You're referring to Clara Moffat?" "No," Miss Marple said. "Clara kept secrets, yes, but she was not the one Arabella feared at the end. Her final journal entry mentions a face in a window. The same window, the same room, the same face. The one that moved behind the curtain." She paused delicately. "Tell me, Inspector, have you spoken to Mr. Giles Worthing recently? The groundskeeper?" Miss Marple gave a small nod. "Arabella hired him 3 years ago to tend to the estate after the orchard fell into decline. Before that, he worked at the vicarage. Quiet man, keeps to himself. But I remembered something curious." She opened her handbag and pulled out a newspaper clipping, a small obituary dated from 1940. Gordon Worthing, age 19, lost at sea during naval patrol, survived by younger brother Giles Worthing. Robert Farnham was a friend of Gordon Worthing, Miss Marple explained. They enlisted together, and Arabella chose Robert. Medford frowned. "You think Giles held a grudge?" "I think Giles witnessed something," she said gently. "Perhaps he saw the fight. Perhaps he saw the body buried in the orchard. But he said nothing, not for years. And when he returned to Rosehill, he kept himself close. First at the vicarage, then Sycamore Lodge. Always watching. Always waiting." Medford leaned back, troubled. "But why kill Arabella now?" Miss Marple closed her handbag. "Because she was going to confess. And confessions open graves, not just literal ones. If she exposed what really happened, Giles would be part of it too. Perhaps not legally, but certainly in the court of village opinion. And we both know how harsh that court can be." At Sycamore Lodge, Clara Moffat moved quickly for a woman who had lived beneath shadows for so long. She clutched the photograph she had uncovered, the one she now remembered being taken mere days before Robert's death. She'd never noticed the third figure in the image back then. She hadn't wanted to. But now it chilled her. In the background, almost hidden behind the trees, was Giles Worthing, posing. Watching. She left the house and made for the police station, her heart hammering beneath her coat. But halfway down the high street, she felt the presence behind her. Giles stepped out from a side alley, blocking her path. "You've been looking at old photos," he said quietly. Clara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You shouldn't. Go digging where the roots run deep, Clara. Arabella learned that. And now she's gone. I'm going to the police, she whispered. Giles took a step closer. I saw you help bury him. That was Arabella's doing. You helped, he repeated, softer now. So if I go down, you go with me. She stepped backward, trembling, and then from behind came a voice. No, Mr. Worthing. I'm afraid it's you who will be going alone. It was Miss Marple. She stood at the corner, Inspector Medford at her side, and a constable already moving toward Giles. For a moment, Giles didn't move. Then, with a sigh, he closed his eyes. Didn't mean to kill her, he said. Clara gasped. I went there to talk to her, to ask her to leave the past buried. She said she was going to tell Honor everything. Said it was time people knew the truth. His eyes opened again, distant. I lost a brother. Then I lost Robert. And I couldn't lose everything else. Miss Marple's voice was soft. You lost yourself years ago, Mr. Worthing. And Arabella, flawed as she was, tried to live with what she did. You chose to bury it. And now, I'm afraid, the orchard has spoken. Later that evening, as Rain returned to Rosehill, Miss Marple stood in the garden behind her cottage, pruning a rose bush. Clara Moffat had been cleared of wrongdoing, though she had chosen to leave Rosehill. Honor Fife had announced plans to donate Sycamore Lodge to a local charity. She would not live in it, she said. Some houses are built on secrets. Best to give them new purpose. And Giles Worthing? He had confessed, but the trial would take months. In the meantime, the orchard had been closed off, part crime scene, part shrine. Miss Marple clipped a small stem and held the bloom close. Murder in Rosehill had not come with a knife in the dark or a scream across the moor. It had come quietly, with memory, with old wounds, and with footsteps on a landing no one remembered walking. Chapter 10. The Garden That Remembered. It was Sunday morning, and for the first time in nearly a week, Rosehill felt almost peaceful again. The bells of St. Mildred's rang across the rooftops, scattering pigeons from the eaves and drawing the usual trickle of villagers to the stone church at the green. Yet even in their Sunday best, the congregation seemed subdued. Something hung in the air, like fog that had yet to lift. Miss Marple did not attend service that morning. Instead, she sat in the tidy back garden of her cottage, sipping tea and rereading the final page of Arabella Fife's journal. A robin flitted across the fence. Distant voices rose from the village square. Gossip, undoubtedly, but she let them pass over her like a breeze. Some mysteries were solved in courtrooms, with barristers and verdicts, but others were solved in quieter ways, ways that left the heart bruised, not broken. Just after noon, she received a visitor. Honor Fife stepped through the garden gate, her usual sharpness softened. She wore no makeup, no dramatic coat, and in her hand was a small pot of hyacinths. I wasn't sure if this was appropriate, she said, but I thought it might be something she'd have liked. Miss Marple stood to greet her. Hyacinths were Arabella's favorite, you know. She always claimed they made her dizzy, but insisted on them every spring. Honor gave a small smile. That sounds like her. They sat together on the bench beneath the trellis, the scent of damp earth and tea roses around them. I still don't know if I believe she killed him, Honor said quietly. Robert. She may not have meant to, Miss Marple replied. But guilt doesn't always require intent. Sometimes it grows where silence is sown. Honor nodded. And Giles Worthing? Why now? Because secrets don't stay buried. Not truly. Arabella stirred the soil when she summoned her solicitor. She was preparing to tell you everything, and someone panicked. Honor looked away. If she had told me before, I think I might have forgiven her. Miss Marple's voice was gentle. You still can. That afternoon, Honor returned to Sycamore Lodge one final time. She wandered its long, empty halls, touched the polished banister, stood in the drawing room where the fire no longer burned. Then she stepped out into the orchard. There, a single wooden cross now stood, unmarked but understood. A promise that the past had been acknowledged. If not absolved. She knelt and planted the pot of hyacinths at its base. No speeches. No tears. Just the wind in the trees, and the feeling that, for the first time in decades, the orchard was no longer watching. Back in the village, word spread of a donation made in Arabella Fife's name. The house would be converted into a rest home for retired artists, a place for quiet lives, Honor had said. Some called it eccentric, others inspired. But Miss Marple understood. It was not about healing the house. It was about redeeming the story. And in Rosehill, where every footstep was remembered and every teacup had heard a secret, stories mattered more than most would admit. That evening, as dusk curled its fingers over the rooftops, Miss Marple returned to her puzzle table. The corners had all been placed, the edges done. Only the center remained, the most complicated part. She smiled to herself. Not every piece belonged where it first appeared, but with time, patience, and a steady hand, the picture always revealed itself. In gardens, in letters, and sometimes in ghosts. Chapter 11. Whispered warnings. The chill of early autumn had begun to settle over Rosehill. Leaves rustled like whispered secrets as villagers hurried home with parcels and umbrellas. The calm that followed the storm of revelations around Sycamore Lodge was fragile, as though the village itself was holding its breath. Miss Marple, wrapped in her familiar shawl, was visiting the local post office when a familiar face appeared. Among the crowd, Mrs. Bickley, a woman known for her sharp tongue and even sharper eyes. Miss Marple, she began, lowering her voice. There's talk you've been asking questions about Giles Worthing. Miss Marple inclined her head gently. Curiosity is a natural human trait, Mrs. Bickley, and sometimes curiosity keeps us safe. Mrs. Bickley glanced around nervously. You should be careful. Not everyone likes old secrets unearthed. Some prefer the past stay buried. Indeed, Miss Marple agreed with a soft smile. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple found herself back at Sycamore Lodge, now quiet but heavy with memory. She wandered through the rooms, touching the lace curtains, the worn armchairs, the faded photographs on the walls. In the drawing room, she spotted a folded piece of paper tucked beneath a book on the side table. It was a letter, addressed in Arabella's neat handwriting, but unsigned. If you read this, dear friend, it means I have fallen silent. Know that the orchard's shadows lengthen, and those who dwell in them are not all lost to time. Beware. The quiet ones, the watchers. Some secrets are safer kept between the trees. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. She knew the handwriting, but who was the letter meant for? That evening, back at her cottage, Miss Marple wrote a letter of her own. It was addressed to Honor Fife. Dear Miss Fife, I fear the past has more to reveal. There are those in Rosehill who watch and wait, unsettled by the light shone upon old wounds. I will be at the vicarage tomorrow morning. If you are able, please join me. Together, we must be prepared for what may come. Miss Marple sealed the envelope and placed it on the mantelpiece. The game was far from over. Outside, the village settled under a sky thick with gathering clouds. Somewhere, a window creaked in the wind. And in the shadows beneath the orchard trees, the watchers stirred once more. Chapter 12. The vicar's quiet counsel. Morning sun struggled to break through the heavy gray clouds as Miss Marple made her way to the vicarage, a modest stone building tucked behind the village church. A path was damp beneath her feet, leaves gathering in small pools of water, mirroring the unsettled mood she carried. Inside, Reverend Plumstead awaited her, seated by the fire with a book in hand, but eyes alert. Good morning, Jane, he greeted warmly. I heard you were expecting company. Miss Marple nodded. Yes, Reverend. Miss Fife should be here shortly. There are matters of the heart and history we need to discuss. History, he repeated thoughtfully. Often a heavier burden than the present. Shortly after, Honor arrived. She was pale but composed, her eyes shadowed by recent grief, yet shining with the determination Miss Marple admired. The three settled in the small sitting room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Miss Marple began. Honor, your aunt's journal contains more than just memories. It speaks of secrets kept and fears that bound her. But there is also mention of a third party, someone who watched from the shadows. Honor's gaze dropped. I thought it was only Clara and Giles. Who else could it be? Before Miss Marple could answer, Reverend Plumstead cleared his throat. Gently. There is one who has been a fixture in Rosehill for many years, often overlooked. The groundskeeper before Giles, Mr. Alfred Crick. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Alfred Crick, an old man now, but in his youth he was known to be fiercely protective of the Fife family. Loyal to a fault. Honor's brow furrowed. What? Does he have to do with anything? Perhaps more than we realize, Miss Marple said. Loyalty, when unchecked, can breed silence. And silence can be a very dangerous thing. The conversation drifted then to the nature of guilt and forgiveness. Reverend Plumstead spoke of redemption, Miss Marple of truth, and Honor of the weight carried by those left behind as the afternoon waned. The three women felt a tentative alliance form, a united front against the shadows threatening to consume their lives. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her shawl. We will visit Mr. Crick soon. There are questions only he can answer. Honor nodded. I want to know everything. I need to. Reverend Plumstead offered a gentle smile. Then you shall have my prayers and my support. Outside, the village seemed to hold its breath. The past was not done revealing itself, and the watcher behind the curtain was still very much awake. Chapter 13. The keeper of secrets the house Alfred Crick lived in was small and unassuming, nestled on the edge of the village near the old mill. Ivy crawled up its stone walls and wildflowers grew untended along the gravel path, giving it the air of a forgotten place. Miss Marple approached the door with measured steps, Honor Fife close behind. They were greeted by a thin man, stooped with age, whose pale eyes regarded them with wary curiosity. Mr. Crick, Miss Marple began softly, we have come to ask about the Fife family. Alfred nodded slowly, his gaze flickering to Honor. I knew Arabella well, he said in a voice rough as gravel. Loyal as you please, though she could be as stubborn as a mule. Honor shifted uneasily. We're trying to understand what happened all those years ago, with Robert Farnham, with the orchard. Mr. Crick sighed deeply and gestured for them to enter. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and pipe tobacco. A cracked clock ticked steadily on the mantelpiece. Arabella was my charge for many years, he began. She trusted me to tend the grounds and keep an eye on things. But there were some things even I was not meant to see. He paused, taking a seat in a worn armchair. One evening, years ago, I came upon Robert and Arabella arguing by the orchard. Words were harsh. I tried to intervene, but Robert pushed me aside. They were both desperate, caught between what they wanted and what society expected. Miss Marple leaned forward. Did you see what happened next? Mr. Crick's eyes clouded. No, I heard a terrible noise, a crash, then silence. Honor swallowed hard. I helped bury the body, Mr. Crick confessed. Not because I wanted to, but because Arabella begged me. She feared the scandal, the ruin it would bring. She was protecting Honor's future. Miss Marple's voice was gentle. And did you tell anyone? No, not until now. The three sat in heavy silence, the weight of decades settling around them. Thank you, Mr. Crick, Miss Marple said at last. Your honesty will bring peace to many." As they left the cottage, Honor glanced back at the frail man. "Did you wait so long to speak?" He shrugged. "Fear and loyalty. Sometimes the two are the same." That evening, Miss Marple penned a note to Inspector Medford. "Mr. Crick has spoken. The orchard's shadow is clearer now, though the heart of the mystery remains. There are still those who watch from behind curtains, and we must tread carefully." She folded the note with care. Outside the village, clock struck 9, and in the darkened windows of Sycamore Lodge, a curtain twitched once again. Chapter 14. Shadows in the parlor. The heavy oak door of Sycamore Lodge creaked open as Miss Marple and Honor stepped inside. The scent of dust and aged wood wrapping around them like a shroud. The house was quieter now, stripped of the bustle of servants and guests. Only the ticking of an old grandfather clock echoed faintly through the halls. They made their way to the parlor, where the furniture had been carefully covered with white sheets. The air hung thick with memories. Honor pulled back one sheet, revealing the delicate embroidery on a settee. "I never noticed this before," she murmured. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room, noting every detail. The faint scorch on the carpet near the fireplace, the slight tilt of a painting, the dust, patterns on the mantel. "It's often the smallest things," she said softly. "They tell the largest stories." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. Clara Moffat stood there, her face pale but determined. "I have something you need to see," she said, holding out a worn envelope. Miss Marple took it gently, breaking the seal. Inside were a series of letters between Arabella and someone signed only as E. Honor's hands trembled as she read aloud an excerpt. "Dearest Arabella, the past cannot stay buried forever. I fear the watchers grow restless. We must be cautious, for the orchard remembers more than we do." Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "Who is he, I wonder?" Clara looked away. "That's what I've been trying to find out." The three women sat in quiet contemplation. The mystery deepened, twisting around them like the creeping ivy on the lodge's walls. One thing was certain: the orchard's secrets were far from finished. Chapter 15. Echoes from the past. The letters signed E sparked a fresh trail in Miss Marple's quiet mind. Who was this mysterious correspondent, and what part did they play in the tangled story of Sycamore Lodge? Determined to uncover the truth, Miss Marple and Honor visited the village archive, a small, dust-filled room above the library where old records and newspapers slept. Hours passed as they sifted through faded documents. At last, a brittle newspaper clipping caught Miss Marple's eye. Eleanor Ellsworth, last seen departing Rosehill under a cloud of scandal. 1935. Eleanor Ellsworth, Miss Marple mused. Could she be our elusive E? Honor frowned. "I've never heard of her." Miss Marple nodded. Eleanor was once a close friend of Arabella Fife, but something happened between them, something the village quickly forgot. That evening, Miss Marple sought out the village historian, Mr. Giles Bennet, a kindly man with a memory sharper than most. "Ah, Eleanor," he said, peering over his spectacles. "A woman of great charm and mystery. There were whispers about her leaving Rosehill after a scandal involving the Fife family. Do you know where she went?" Miss Marple asked. "Last I heard, she moved to London and then vanished from the public eye entirely." Miss Marple and Honor exchanged glances. The past was not only buried beneath the orchard soil, it was scattered across time and distance, waiting for them to gather the pieces. And the shadow of Eleanor Ellsworth promised new revelations, and perhaps new dangers. Chapter 16. The London connection. Miss Marple and Honor sat in the dimly lit drawing room of the village library. A small collection of correspondence and photographs spread between them. They had traced Eleanor Ellsworth's name to a series of London addresses. But beyond that, the trail grew cold. "Finding Eleanor will not be easy," Miss Marple mused. folding a fragile letter. She could be anywhere. Honor's fingers trembled as she held a black and white photograph Eleanor, young and vibrant, standing beside Arabella in a garden long gone. There's something about her eyes, Honor whispered, like she knows more than she's letting on. Determined to find answers, Miss Marple wrote a letter to the London Historical Society, hoping to uncover any records of Eleanor Ellsworth's later life. Days later, a reply arrived. Eleanor had indeed lived in London, working as a governess for a wealthy family until her death 10 years ago. Yet no records mentioned any connection to the Fifes or the tragedy at Sycamore Lodge. Still, the mystery lingered as twilight settled over Rosehill. Miss Marple gazed toward the village horizon. The past is like a shadow, she said softly. It follows us, sometimes close, sometimes distant, but always waiting. Honor nodded. And some shadows are longer than others. That night, as the wind whispered outside her window, Miss Marple prepared for the next step. She would return to Sycamore Lodge, to the room behind the orchard window, where the curtain had once moved. There were still questions unanswered. And a ghost waiting to speak. Chapter 17. Secrets in the Orchard. The moon hung low over Sycamore Lodge, casting long shadows across the overgrown orchard. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, a quiet stillness settling over the night. Miss Marple stood by the window of the sealed guest room, the one Arabella had always kept shut. She pulled back the heavy curtain slowly, revealing the dark orchard beyond. The branches swayed in the gentle wind, whispering secrets only the trees could understand. A faint rustling caught her attention. Stepping outside, she moved carefully toward the gnarled trunk of the oldest sycamore tree. Beneath its branches lay a small, weathered box, nearly buried under moss and soil. With gentle hands, she unearthed it and opened the lid. Inside were letters, photographs, and a locket bearing a faded portrait of a young woman, Eleanor Ellsworth. Miss Marple's breath caught. Here was the missing piece, the connection between past and present. The next morning, Honor arrived, and together they read the letters. They spoke of love, betrayal, and a secret pact to protect the Fife family name. One letter stood out, dated shortly before Robert Farnham's death. Arabella, the burden grows heavier. If the truth is told, all will fall. But I fear we have no choice. You must be cautious. The watchers are not idle. Yours, E. Miss Marple looked out toward the orchard, the weight of decades pressing upon her. The watchers are still here, she said softly, and they will not rest until every secret is revealed. Honor clutched the locket tightly. What do we do now? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet resolve. We wait, and we listen. Chapter 18. The watchers reveal themselves. Village of Rosehill was beginning to sense a shift, a subtle tension, threading through the daily routines. Whispers followed footsteps, and eyes lingered a little too long behind curtained windows. Miss Marple felt the change as well. The watchers, those silent observers hidden in plain sight, were becoming bolder. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she found herself in the village square. The gas lamps flickered on, casting pools of light and shadow. A figure approached, a man known to few, but whose presence had always been felt. George Sims, the young stable boy. He paused beside her, voice low. Miss Marple, I saw something last night in the orchard. She listened carefully as George described a shadowy figure moving near the oldest sycamore tree, the same tree where the box had been found. Did you see who it was? She asked. George shook his head. No, but they dropped something, a small key with an engraving. It looked old, like it belonged to the lodge. Miss Marple's mind raced. This was no coincidence. The watchers were no longer content to stay hidden. The next morning, Miss Marple and Honor examined the key. The engraving matched a pattern on the locket found in the box. "This key opens something important, miss," Marple said. "Perhaps a secret compartment or a hidden drawer." Their curiosity piqued. They decided to search Sycamore Lodge once more, focusing on places Arabella might have used to conceal her secrets. That evening, as shadows deepened, the orchard seemed to hold its breath. The past was unraveling, and the watchers were ready to reveal all they knew. Chapter 19. The hidden drawer. Miss Marple and Honor returned to Sycamore Lodge under a pale morning sky. The house, though quiet, felt charged alive with unseen stories waiting to be told. They began their search in the old study, a room lined with tall bookshelves and heavy curtains that filtered the light. Miss Marple's fingers traced the spines of leather-bound volumes, then paused at an ornately carved writing desk. "I have a feeling," she said softly, "that this desk might hold more than just paper." With the small engraved key in hand, they examined the desk closely. After a few moments of careful probing, Honor's fingers found a tiny catch hidden beneath a drawer. The drawer slid open to reveal a collection of sealed envelopes, each marked with dates spanning several years. Honor carefully lifted the top envelope and broke the wax seal. Inside was a letter addressed to Arabella, written in a hurried, almost desperate hand. Miss Marple read aloud, "Arabella, you must be cautious. The orchard silence can be deadly. I fear what has been done will come to light soon, and when it does, no one will be safe." Honor looked up sharply. "Who wrote this?" Miss Marple's eyes were thoughtful. "I believe it is our mysterious Eleanor Ellsworth." As they continued to examine the letters, a pattern emerged: warnings, confessions, and veiled threats, all tied to the tragic events surrounding Robert Farnham's death. It was clear now. The past was not simply buried beneath the orchard soil. It was alive, haunting, watching, and waiting for the right moment to strike. Outside, the village clock chimed 10, and somewhere in Sycamore Lodge, a curtain twitched once again. Chapter 20. The gathering storm. The wind had picked up by midday, rattling the windows of Sycamore Lodge like whispered warnings from the past. Miss Marple and Honor sat by the fire in the great hall. The sealed letters spread before them like a map of secrets and sorrows. The truth was no longer a distant glimmer. It was a gathering storm, ready to break. "Do you think the watchers will try to stop us?" Honor asked, her voice low. Miss Marple sipped her tea thoughtfully. "People guard their secrets fiercely, especially when no secrets threaten to unravel their lives." The sound of footsteps in the hall made them both look up. Clara Moffat entered, clutching a bundle of papers. "I found these in the old servants' quarters," she said, her eyes dark with concern. "Letters, diaries, hints of a feud between the Fifes and a family called the Murrays." Miss Marple took the papers carefully. "Another thread to follow." Honor frowned. "Who are the Murrays?" "An old Rosehill family," Clara replied. "Once powerful, but faded with time. Still, old grudges don't die easily." As the storm clouds gathered outside, the three women prepared to delve deeper into the tangled web of past enmities and hidden motives. The orchard was no longer just a place of memories. It was a battlefield.